Yes, I know this is not the Chaz video, but unironically, I do have it on the way. It is in the pipeline. It's in the render queue, as Spoonie would say. No, really, check my editing drive. Here's 2 hours of raw commentary, and another 10 minutes of addendums once some new stories came out about it. The only thing I'm waiting on now is to see if any of those arrests from yesterday materialize into a news story. I'll tack that onto the video, and then I'll release it, so you'll probably see it Monday or Tuesday or something. Sorry it's taken this long, but really, I am working on it. But I'm doing this video because I've realized something. Over the past dozen, maybe 20 videos or so that I've done on this channel, I've noticed a trend. And the trend basically amounts to the fact that I'm getting old. I'm referencing past political paradigms. I'm talking about the 2012 or 2008 elections as if they're at least somewhat new. I'm still disappointed that the left is not the left of the 90s, the left that I was a part of. I am slowly becoming an old man. And you know what? I'm not too insecure about it just yet. I'm sure everybody on some level is insecure about them getting old. And I would be lying to you if I said that it never ever bothered me. But I've realized that some of the political experiences I've discussed, some of the people who watch me don't share those experiences, and it's primarily due to age. For example, the N64 was my big console of choice when I was a kid. That was kind of the era that I came from. Meanwhile, if you're 20 right now listening to this video, you grew up with the Wii. And that's kind of wild for me to think about, because I picked up the Wii in my first year of university. That was like my university console. The Wii PS3 360 era. And yes, you can tell exactly what kind of person that I am because I'm judging era based on game console generation. But still, though, the Wii feels at least a little bit new to me. It certainly doesn't feel like it's a classic console or anything. But some of you grew up with that console as kids. Some of you had it as the console that you played on when you were 9 or 10 years old. Some of you went through your formative years with the Wii. And it's kind of funny because, you know, in the early 2000s, millennials would get a whole lot of shit, and I'm a millennial. They were considered to be ridiculously left-wing, like to the point that when the first crowd of them came out of the universities, they were considered near unemployable because they were all basically spoiled children with a hyped-up sense of self-importance. Like the whole indigo child thing, the special snowflake, you know? That was my generation. I'm not surprised that we spawned the Occupy movement back in 2009 or whatever it was, which was large and loud, but ultimately disorganized and completely fell apart, because the people there had no idea what they were doing or what they were fighting for. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking of it, I will say one thing about that era. At the very least, Obama's Democrats knew to, silently distance themselves from Occupy, while the Republicans openly opposed it. At least they didn't full-on embrace revolutionary communism like they're doing now. But the big joke for a long time is that millennials, due to their largely different habits from Gen Xers and boomers, were destroying the American economy. And it was in fact a meme for a long time, just all of the things millennials were ruining. Here's a list here. Millennials are killing the beer industry. Millennials are killing chains like Buffalo Wild Wings and Applebee's. Sorry, Sargon. Psychologically scarred millennials are killing dozens of industries, and it's their parents' fault. Millennials are killing the napkin industry. Millennials are killing the golf industry. Are millennials killing the car industry? Will millennials kill home ownership? Millennials could be a problem for America's most iconic motorcycle brand. Millennials are killing the 9-to-5 work week. They're killing focus groups. They're killing dinner dates. And just in general, millennials are killing it. That's pretty good. And there's certainly some critique to be had here. The way that the boomers lived was ridiculous. It was entirely non-sustainable. They inherited a post-war economy that they had little to do with actually building. It was their parents, generally. They did a whole bunch of exploiting and selling out. And in a lot of instances, they're refusing to move aside to allow the next generation to come through. I think this is why the whole OK Boomer thing was that short-lived meme for a while. Because frankly, the way that boomers have behaved has been pretty reprehensible. Boomers make up the majority of both the neocons and the neo-libs. They make up primarily both the bankers and corporatists that the far left complains about, as well as the globalists and career politicians that the far right complains about. So this idea that millennials are refusing to live like boomers, and the boomers are getting worried about it, yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm not gonna lie. But we can't lay everything at the feet of the boomers, certainly not. In many ways, the millennials are just as entitled as the boomers claim they are. Of course, the boomers raised them to be that way, but that's another topic in a sense. They're still entitled, and they're not kids anymore, alright? People are still posting like, man, all those millennials, they're going out and partying and having a good time. Dude, millennials are like 30, they're 35 now. Some of them are even 40, I think. At this point, millennials are sellouts. However, they're not corporate sellouts, they're political sellouts. They're grasping on to fringe destructive theories like socialism because basically they have nothing left and they feel like their parents have robbed it from them. It's a strange paradigm because there's a lot of spoiled university kids out there who have been indoctrinated to hate their parents, mostly by their really shitty Marxist university teachers. But at the same time, there are definitely a lot of reasons to hate your average boomer. And I'm sure some of those people actually do have shitty parents. Like, check out this take for a minute. I know this is a far left take. This comes from Rami. I'm a progressive Muslim who never drinks and never has sex, but got drunk and fucked Zoe Quinn in a hotel room. Ismail. Big deal in the indie game dev world, and also very far left. And despite that, at least some of this rings true, doesn't it? Millennials tell us the one thing they'd bring back from childhood. He replies with opportunity, democracy, privacy, ice caps, affordable education and rent, an actual job economy instead of a gig economy, hope, Napster. We can definitely lay some of this at the feet of the boomers for sure. But Rami, you're a millennial like me. We are not children anymore. We are in fact getting old. And some of this is our fault. There are opportunities out there, but it does seem like on some level, millennials do not want to chase after them. They want things handed to them. Maybe it's because they saw that things were generally handed to the boomers and they thought that that's what life should be. But the boomers were an exception. Who is it that's eroding democracy? Really, who is it? I know that you think it's the dreaded far right, but considering that the left has been co-opted by revolutionary communists, I think democracy would begin to disappear if somebody that you endorsed ever held real power. Privacy, okay. Isn't that being eroded by far left corporations? I know you think that's an oxymoron, but it really isn't. You have these corporations pushing progressive values, becoming ever more globalist, and by the way, there's certainly a leftist element to globalism, the whole worldwide communism thing. The radical left might complain about big tech taking away privacy, but they still want that big tech cartel to be empowered because they control it. And I could keep going on this list, but I don't want this video to be hours and hours long. The point is, Rami, and to basically every other lefty millennial out there, we're not kids anymore. We're not playing our Super Nintendos in the basement at 5 years old or whatever the case may be. We are adults now. We're responsible for our lives. And a lot of this stuff can in fact be laid at our feet. And as a quick aside, if you ever wanted to see somebody who's really stuck in the past, just go look at Movie Bob's feed. The right wing has an abject, roiling, seething hatred for smart, driven, creative people, but not even as they exist now. It's an unresolved residual hatred of the younger incarnations they remember from school age, or more likely, a bitterness at the idea that they grew up to be something. Bob, I know that you're talking about your political opponents, but it really sounds like you're talking about yourself here, man. You may need to let the past go a little bit. I know you were probably bullied. Hell, I was bullied. I had a lot of enemies in grade school. It was a time when it was not yet cool to play video games. It was not yet common to play video games. So if you were a gamer, you were ostracized by basically half the school year because you were not one of the cool kids. You were not one of the athletic kids. You were not one of the charismatic kids. You were certainly made fun of by all the girls as well. And your choice of friend was basically, does this guy like games? Okay, I guess we're friends because there's no one else. Movie Bob's a little bit older than me, but I think we had a similar experience, at least when it comes to video games in school. And you know what? I kind of get what he's saying. Whenever I think back on the bullies of my childhood, I still have that little bit of twinge, that little knee-jerk reaction of, oh yeah, that guy was an asshole, fuck him. And maybe the person still is an asshole. Maybe he's not. Maybe if I looked one of them up on Facebook, they'd be a regular person. I still have no desire to, go and interact with them now. I've moved on. But that's the point, is that I've moved on. Bob, you may need to move on. Remember, this is coming from a guy who got mad over the Sonic the Hedgehog movie because he bought into the whole console war thing of the 90s so hard that here we are, 25 years later, and he's still going on about it. The nice, normal people of the world still haven't forgiven me for being born. I don't know how common Movie Bob's sentiment is among millennials, but if it was at least somewhat common, I wouldn't be surprised. It kind of fits into the whole perpetual victimhood thing, But this is not a video about Movie Bob. I'm sure that will come one day, but for now we have to move on. How many of you recall this comic floating around the Twitter sphere about a year ago? Wow, that 90s movie I used to love is on Netflix. Haha, cool. I haven't seen this in years. Let's watch it. Oh, gross. That was really sexist. That seemed kinda racist. I don't remember this movie being so homophobic. I guess I forgot all about this transphobia. The 90s sucked. I know at some point I'm going to have to do a much more in-depth look at the whole erasing of culture that millennial leftists seem to be engaging in right now. And I know it's not just movies on Netflix or whatever, it's also statues and stuff like that. They basically want to erase all of culture, and I'll have something more in-depth to say about that at a future time. But I brought this comic up for a very specific reason. And no, it's not because the author self-insert is once again quite unattractive looking. I don't know why people draw themselves this unattractively. Of course, the hentai variant of it kind of fixed that. I can't scroll any further down though, because this video would instantly be yeeted off YouTube into oblivion. No, it was because in some ways, and it's going to sound strange, but hear me out. In some ways, the millennials have become their own boomers. Here's what I mean by that. Earlier we talked about all the ways that millennials were destroying things. They were destroying industries back, in 2010 or 2012 or 2015, back when they were all young and fresh-faced and in college. But now that they're 30 or they're 35 and they have some gray hair coming in, they have kids, they've stopped partying so much, they're putting some money away, they're working a regular 9-to-5, they're selling out basically. Now that millennials have become the establishment that they protested 10 or 15 years ago, they are saying about Gen Z the exact same stuff that was said about them, and was even said about Gen X back when Gen X was young. From Vice magazine's Power and Privilege issue, the hot new Gen Z trend is skipping college. High schoolers are weighing the benefits of blue-collar trades at a time when well-paying jobs and no debt are hard to pass up. Oh no, they're not going to our degree farms. How will we indoctrinate the next generation with mandatory gender studies classes? Do you have white teenage sons? Listen up. How white supremacists are recruiting boys online. Oh no, white supremacy is coming through the Ethernet cables. This is from the ADL. This is not a game, how Steam harbors extremists. And it's basically a pamphlet on how if your son or daughter has a Steam account, they're playing video games on their computers, they're probably Nazis. And speaking of Nazis, this is from the Washington Post. Nazi flag displayed in high school window prompts anger and an investigation. Now, those of you who have not forgotten what it's like to be a kid or a teenager, or just a troublemaker, I guess, what does it sound like? It sounds like a prank. It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? It sounds like some kids, who by the way aren't Nazis, understand that the Nazi flag riles people up, especially old boomers, so they put it in the window. They were explicitly irreverent. They were being edgy just for the sake of it. But as it turns out, they're not riling up boomers anymore, they're riling up millennials. This is before my time, but back in the 80s, there was definitely a campaign against Dungeons & Dragons. The idea was that if you played tabletop, you were part of some kind of satanic cult. Back when Elvis was popular, they said the same thing about him and the Beatles. They did it for rock and roll, they did it for video games. When the Columbine school shooters did their thing back in 1999, the media blamed the shooting on the fact that it was discovered that these two kids had a copy of Doom in their house. And even when that shooting happened, Doom was old news, man. The first Doom came out in 1993. It was very clearly a case of an older generation not fully understanding a younger generation and simply slapping pieces together and seeing what stuck. In the early 2000s, Jack Chick comics went viral. These were basically just little comics that were handed out by religious people, talking about all the dangerous, sinful things that young people get into nowadays. This image is probably the most popular one just because of the ridiculousness on this woman's face, and it's about D&D. My point is, millennials, and to a lesser extent Gen Xers, were demonized for decades for every single thing that they did, by a generation of people who had no idea what their kids were actually doing, what they were actually demonizing them for, and what they were scapegoating. Didn't matter if it was blood in Mortal Kombat, didn't matter if it was Dungeons and Dragons having satanic imagery, didn't matter if it was rap music and the explicit lyrics, didn't matter. They disapproved based on their sensibilities, and then turned around and said the kids today, their kids, had gone wrong. And to a young millennial who was in high school in the year 2001 or something, these people were laughingstocks. The ones that were floating around for me specifically in high school were like, one, the whole rainbow cock thing, where basically girls would put on different types of lipstick and then go give guys blowjobs, and if a guy got every color on his dick, he won or something. And then secondly, Jenkem. And Jenkem was a big meme in 2007, where basically kids would basically just take shit, like fermented human shit, put it in a bottle, let it bubble up, and then breathe the gases to get high. The problem is, both of these instances, they might have happened a little bit, but they were never widespread. The stories, the rumors, were always jokes that people my age were playing on the boomers. We said this shit was happening, and then they would write articles about it, and it would be a big fucking laugh. And now the millennials, I guess because they're just too stupid, or they're too politically driven nowadays or something, they don't understand that Gen Z is doing the exact same thing to them. Like with the whole OK hand symbol being a symbol of racism, or white milk, or something. You know, these are things that kids on 4chan pushed, and millennials, forgetting the fact that they were once young, ate that shit up and believed it. Or there's the whole Hawaiian shirt thing happening right now. Oh, the Boogaloo boys, they're wearing Hawaiian shirts like it's Miami Vice or something, walking around with their guns talking about starting a civil war. Oh my god, we have to do something. Oh my god, kids are throwing coronavirus parties, where whoever catches the virus wins. We have to stop it. Our kids are going crazy. And here's that article, written by Faith Karimi and Jamil Lynch on CNN. Jesus, that's an unfortunate last name. But here's the LinkedIn account of the two people involved. Now, I've got a way to view LinkedIn accounts without actually being logged into LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is a fucking cancer zone. So sorry if it looks a little bit strange, but it is accurate. So Jamil Lynch, she's the national desk editor for CNN since October 2016. She worked for Fox, she worked for Kusa TV, KCTV. She was ABC7 Chicago back in 2006. She did a few small jobs working her way up. And then, from 2001 to 2006, she got her BA in television writing and producing at Columbia College. Well, okay. So she is, probably about 4 or 5 years older than me. That puts her squarely as a millennial. Here's Faith Karimi. News desk editor at CNN since 2009, Baltimore Sun at 2006, and before that she was at Grambling State University to get her master's in journalism and mass communications. So again, probably around the same age. Millennial. These two are old enough to remember pranking their teachers, back during the era where being a prankster was considered one of the great things for kids to do. The MTV era, the Jackass era. And here they are, writing articles about this nonsense. Millennials have almost forgotten what it was like to be children. And I know that happens eventually as you grow up, it's just kind of how it is. But I never expected them to become boomers themselves. I never expected something like no pixels for fascists to come out of millennial thought, maligning gamers and YouTubers as fascist enablers. This is the kind of stuff that you'd see Jack Thompson do back in the late 90s, trying to have video games censored because they didn't meet his moral sensibilities. My generation is getting old, and considering that they're tied with the boomers in being the most entitled, spoiled generation that's ever come along, with the only difference being a superficial swing leftward instead of a superficial swing rightward for the boomers, I am not surprised that as millennials, hit the late 20s, early 30s, some of them are probably approaching 40 at this point, I am not surprised that they are morphing into authoritarians, just like the boomers did. I am not surprised that they are hypocritical, wasteful, closed-minded, ignorant, with the only difference being that they slap a left-wing coat of paint on it instead of a right-wing coat like their parents. But most importantly of all, I think, is that unlike the boomers, the millennials were so spoiled that they actually grew up believing they would never get old. The spotlight would always be on them. They would always be the arbiter of what is new and cool. That mindset explains takes like this. The best that can come of coronavirus is elderly conservatives all die, the billionaires get their backs to the wall, the economy collapses and is reborn like a phoenix from its ashes as a socialist economy, and millennials emerge from quarantine horny as fuck and start making babies. They legitimately want what is considered to be old, decrepit. Not just old people, but old history, old styles of thought, old ideas, to be swept away, to be violently swept away, in fact. To be forcefully destroyed if necessary, to make breathing room for the millennials. And they are doing this because they genuinely can't conceive of a future, by the way, the only possible future, where one day they are old. And one day, they will be swept aside by the younger generation. But that is what getting old is all about. It happens to everyone. One day, I'll be dead. One day, everyone I know, everyone I care about, will be dead. One day, you will be dead. As well as everyone you care about, too. On some level, life is fundamentally a tragedy. Right now, there is an intense hatred of the older generations. And it's a hatred that I've experienced and remember quite fondly during my time as an SJW. I've made a video about that if you want to go watch that. But basically, I remember thinking, oh, those old people, how could they be so backward? How could they think like this? How could they behave like this? And you know what? On some level, I was right. There are definitely objectionable things that old people do because they just don't know any better, and we've actually found better ways to do things. But I don't think that that's a moral justification for legitimate hatred, to actually wanting to wipe out the boomers or something. But yeah, our current culture does revolve around the youth experience. You know, all the stories are like young adult adventures. You know, they're in high school or they're in their 20s and they're going off to have some kind of grand adventure in their young years. During all these formative times in their life, romance is considered to be the domain of the young. Schooling and learning are things that young people are expected to do, but not old people. There is definitely this focus on the younger experience. And I think that that's basically culminated in the millennial mindset. This idea that they will never be out of style. They will never be what's not cool. But I mean, millennials are having kids now. And to those kids, their parents are definitely what's not cool. At this point, I'm just kind of rambling, so let me get to my thesis here. I believe that the modernist lifestyle that my generation has been raised into, and this is not a full critique of modernism, there's a lot of great things about the modern material world. I would not have it any other way. But one of its major drawbacks is the fact that I think millennials are generally spiritually stunted. Doesn't mean they have to be religious, though religion can help. But they definitely don't believe in anything beyond the physical. They believe that the entire human experience can be quantified by science, as biology or something, which is actually quite funny because whenever you talk about trans issues, they'll call you a biological essentialist, as if that's a bad thing. They'll completely deny human nature in a lot of ways, but yet they still invoke biology when it comes to the human experience. It's quite strange. But nonetheless, to them, there is no spiritual, there is no meaning. It's all just tricks of the mind. And you know, maybe it is on a practical level. But that kind of thinking certainly leads to the existential depression that a lot of millennials seem to be facing right now. And the way that they deal with that is they become radically self-centered. And they spent decades within the culture of youth having that reinforced. So yes, they were screwed by the boomers, but they're also massively entitled as well. Both of these things are true. But age is creeping up on the millennials now. They don't see it, or they're blinded to it, or they're purposely trying not to look, but it's happening. And if we had to define the source of, I guess we could call it millennial rage, it would not be the economy, it would not be capitalism, it would not necessarily be the boomers, though I do think their rage towards those things are symptoms of the larger problem. But the source is their own mortality. They grew up experiencing such abundance, and in an environment and culture that centered them so much for so long, causing, you know, the extended adolescence man-child phenomenon in some cases, that they have no idea how to deal with the fact that they're old, that they're getting old, that they'll die one day. They haven't yet fully realized that when they were in school thinking their teacher was an old man, that's the age they are now. They haven't yet fully realized that no, they're no longer 21, and therefore thinking an 18-year-old girl is hot is kind of weird now. Maybe this explains all the social justice apologetics for pedophilia that we're seeing right now. And, of course, because of all of this, they definitely can't understand that when the younger generation rebels against them and decides to piss them off a little bit just for the sake of pissing them off, that no, they're not actually being radicalized to be Nazis or white supremacists or the alt-right or something ridiculous like that. They're just being edgy. They can't see that because they think they're still young. They think, oh no, we're the ones being edgy by being far left. Well, no, things have changed. Within the next 10 years, I expect a lot of the millennials to start going absolutely apeshit as they realize that they're 45 with gray hair. They're thinking of buying that sports car as their midlife crisis. That they are, in essence, the dads that they hate. And you know what? So far, I've been mostly talking like this doesn't apply to me. I don't think so. It absolutely does apply to me. I'm getting old too. I am at least somewhat determined not to get old as I get older. Meaning that I'm still going to at least be open to new ideas. But I do think that true maturity is balancing both the young and the old. It's not simply believing blindly that you are a teenager when you're obviously not. but it's also not giving up your passions like a lot of, boomer-style adults do. And ironically enough, I think that's actually the best way to avoid getting old. You don't cling to this identity, this notion that you are the youth, because that just leads you to becoming insular, isolated, basically boomers, like all the examples we've talked about today. But you do recognize that even as you age, you can still enjoy your life. Understand who you are and where you are, both in place and in time, but don't let that sour the things that you truly love. I think that's how you stay young, and that's something I'm going to try to do. Anyway, sorry for the very long rant. This is coming out on July 4th, so if you pop over to my Twitch stream pretty much right now as the video goes up, I'm going to be playing an appropriately themed America July 4th game, so please check it out. That's twitch.tv/gameboomers. And hey, if you don't want to, that's fine too. I'll see you tomorrow for the weekly sip. I love you guys. And remember, stay young.